Marsha Coleman-Adebayo recounts her court battle against the Environmental Protection Agency, her former employer, that attempted to quell her claims that a corporation was responsible for hundreds of deaths in a vanadium mine in South Africa. As a result of her experiences, she organized the No Fear Coalition to provide protection to other whistleblowers. Her efforts led to the passage of the first civil rights legislation of the 21st century, Notification of Federal Employees Anti-Discrimination and Retaliation, signed into law by former President George W. Bush in 2002. This is about an hour and a half.
Good evening, and welcome to the Mid-Manhattan branch of the New York Public Library. Thank you for joining us this evening for tonight's presentation. Tonight's program is a discussion led by the author on the book No Fear, A Whistleblower's Triumph Over Corruption and Retaliation at the EPA. After graduating from MIT, the author landed her dream job at the EPA assisting post-apartheid South Africa. Her dream became a nightmare when she attempted to investigate a multinational corporation responsible for the deaths of hundreds of South Africans mining vanadium. She blew the whistle and suffered the fallout faced by federal employees who take on the bureaucracy. She tells the story of her struggle to bring protection to all federal employees facing retribution for telling the truth. Now, before we begin tonight's program, I have the usual requests. Please silence your cell phones, pagers, any other noisy devices that might interrupt the program. Secondly, please do not take any pictures or make any recordings this evening unless you have received prior permission from the New York Public Library Administration. And we thank you for your courtesy and consideration. Tonight's program is being filmed by C-SPAN, and consequently, at the end of the program, there will be a question and answer period, and we ask you to wait for the microphone so that we can record the questions that you're asking for the program. Now, our speaker tonight is Marsha Coleman-Adebayo, PhD, founder of the No Fear Coalition, and former senior policy analyst at the United States Environmental Protection Agency. She received her BA degree from Barnard College, Columbia University, and her doctorate from MIT. In 1996, she became a federal whistleblower and filed complaints about a U.S. company mining vanadium in South Africa. With her leadership, the No Fear Coalition secured passage of the Notification of Federal Employees Anti-Discrimination and Retaliation Act, the No Fear Act. Currently, she's on the board of directors of the National Whistleblower Center, a nonpartisan advocacy group. She's been featured in several newspapers, such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Federal Times. In addition, joining us tonight is Tylan Usavior Washington, a Harlem native who is a filmmaker, journalist, and media activist with BW Moving Images. His third film, No Fear, features the story of whistleblower and human rights activist Marsha Coleman-Adebayo. Tonight, before the book discussion with Ms. Coleman-Adebayo starts, we have the privilege of meeting Mr. Washington and seeing part of that film. So if you please, welcome Mr. Tylan Usavior Washington.
Thank you so much. I want to thank each and every one of you for being here this evening. I want to thank Lois Moore for facilitating this event. And as a media activist, I want to thank the library here for hosting such a very important forum and discussion, especially in a climate today where people are constantly persecuted for telling the truth and speaking up. We have a culture in this country that punishes people for doing what is true and what is right. And not on my watch is the good guy going to finish last. So I'm taking up doing this film. Actually, this is a short. We are currently working and we're fundraising to do a much fuller piece because there are so many dimensions and there are going to be so many things that are going to be revealed in the film that you won't get in the book or you won't see here. So you can go to our website, www.bwmovingimages, to find out how, if you want to, so desire, want to be a part of the film business and help to make this film a reality. As you know, independent filmmakers and journalists, we have to do a lot of these things sometimes out of pocket, and so we have to call and actually rely on people just like you who are here tonight to get this film produced. Also, as a media activist, I have to acknowledge C-SPAN for always covering the kinds of stories that you don't see on mainstream media. Mainstream media is basically mind poison, and you can quote me on that. So, you know, when you have entities like C-SPAN who has the courage and the insight to come out and videotape these very, very important issues that are really important to all of us in here, I think that needs to be applauded. The fabric of our entire nation is dependent upon people like Marsha Coleman-Adebayo. People like her who step up and stand up for what is right, even when it's not popular or the important part of this is not safe. Because people don't know she was threatened. Her children was about to be kidnapped because she really was concerned about people who are the poorest of the poor, who depended on this mine to put food on the table for their families. No one else seemed to care. And she was actually encouraged to just, you know, decorate your room and be quiet, receive a wonderful check, and don't worry about it, you know. And that didn't sit right with her. And how many people in here are faced in some kind of similar situation where, you know, it's easy to just look away. It's easy to just, you know, keep your mouth shut, think about your paycheck, think about, well, you know, I don't want to make waves. I don't want to cause any trouble. I don't want to lose my job. And that's why you have Bernie Madoffs. That's why you have folks who Occupy Wall Street, or something that I just saw that was so repugnant, was some peaceful demonstrators being sprayed by an officer during one of the Occupy Wall Street movements. And none of the other officers said that this is not policy. I have a feeling that if Marsha was there, that cop would have got arrested. You would have seen for the first time a police officer being arrested by another police officer. Because I think it becomes so repugnant to some people that some of these things that we see go on. I'm not going to take too much time because you're about to see 10 minutes of, like I said, a much larger piece. I guess you can get it started, and then I'll come back up if you have a couple of questions, and then introduce finally Marsha Coleman-Adebayo.
New use in the renewable energy field that is getting investors' attention, with Discover magazine calling vanadium the element that could change the world.
The drive for renewable energy has created a rush for development of efficient energy storage devices, a new generation of batteries, essentially. My next guest company produces a key element for one type of battery, the metal vanadium.
And what's very enticing is also the possibility that we'll see vanadium used in green technologies for the storage of solar power and wind power.
And it's a company that provides multi-megawatt energy storage solutions using, and I have no idea what this is, vanadium redox fuel cells. That's one of the coolest things I've ever said out loud.
husband, Simon B.S. Boy Maki. I started lwala.
That you get sick.
Nala ka mafatla le maoto le mala. Then ka bablella ka baraka la itshuru ke letsatsi la mmala ke ya le tla
I told
fitla.
them that one day that will be
So, 35 sa December mna mohula a robala.
December.
Ne ba the end ya monaka.
That was the end of my husband.
The problem with me at Vametco was that they used to burn the vanadium to fuse it. So when working there, you could see suspended vanadium particles in the air, which we used to inhale. There's a certain chemical, they call it MVO. The MVO can penetrate the skin, like the old man said. After washing, when you wear your clothes and you start sweating, the sweat will come out with the black powder. And when you come at home, you look at your clothes, you could see the blackness of that powder.
Did you have any bleeding?
Yes, sometimes when I went to the toilet to urinate, sometimes the urine would come, it is red.
I was a machine operator. There was a machine there they called Krolik machine, taking samples down there at the mine. Yeah, and I started realizing that my tongue used to change during the night.
Like green?
Yeah, my tongue used to change. I couldn't breathe during the night. My feet used to burn like fire. And I started complaining when times goes by that I'm not well. So I'd start giving sick notes and so on. They called me to the meeting and said, look, the company couldn't afford you because you can't do the job properly. And they dismissed me in 1990. I didn't know because when I get to Vametco, I was just healthy. I was just fine. Took me to X-ray, everything, I was healthy.
So you saw your friends and neighbors dying. Did you believe that they were dying because they worked at Vametco?
Yeah, when I think about it, good again, Nagam Queen. I want to visit the Gaira. The American Gassiveri, Sagapella Good Fala.
The job I cannot job anymore now because I've got no power, got no strength. And all what I'm waiting is death.
I was an EPA employee that discovered that a community in South Africa had been poisoned by a U.S. multinational corporation. And when I reported it, literally the ceiling fell down on my head. My supervisors told me to shut up and not to talk about it. I know that it takes a lot of courage to come out and to talk about your experiences. We also have a lot of repression in the United States, and when you speak out, the state also oftentimes will punish you for speaking out.
Marsha Coleman-Adebayo has been a senior analyst at the EPA for 10 years, and she claims it has been a decade of discrimination.
I was an intruder in their world. I could participate in high-level staff meetings, I was told, only because my colleagues regarded me as an honorary white man. And I must admit, I was so stunned. I remember hearing the laughter from around the table.
She and other employees took their case to Congress and took on EPA Chief Carol Browner.
Perhaps people behaved poorly. Perhaps they had ulterior motives. It's the political season.
Browner told us she was unaware of any complaints.
We've more than doubled the number of minorities in our top ranks.
What difference does it make if you bring 2 million of us to this agency and we're all living in hell?
Today I join with the city of Gaithersburg in honoring one person, Dr. Marsha Coleman-Adebayo, a leader in the struggle for civil rights and worker protections.
While these attacks were meant to break my spirit, I decided instead to wage a struggle for human dignity and integrity.
Dr. Coleman-Adebayo won a historic lawsuit in the year 2000 against a federal agency based on racial, sexual discrimination, and a hostile work environment.
My name is Marsha Coleman-Adebayo, and I thank God for this day.
As a result of this victory and her subsequent testimony before the United States Congress, the Notification of Federal Employees Anti-Discrimination and Retaliation Act, also known as the No Fear Act, was passed by Congress and signed into law. After passage of this important legislation, Dr. Coleman-Adebayo formed the No Fear Coalition, a group of civil rights and whistleblower organizations dedicated to working for increased legislative protections for those federal employees who speak out to protect the public good.
Marsha eventually won her court case. It sounds a lot like the Aaron Brockovich movie, and actually, Marsha's story could also make it to the big screen. Actor Danny Glover is reportedly preparing a movie based on her story.
I've got to know Marsha because we're working on a film on her courageous fight for justice. It was a victory for not only Marsha, but it was a victory for women, all human beings who stand up for justice, who stand up and say no, who stand up and be counted.
Waves crashing all around me, stormy waters trying to drown me. Take me under, far away from my home. No refuge as far as I can see. Can't swim to safety. I'm afloat on the unknown, and I'm no longer blind. I can see just fine. I know where I'm going and what I have to do. Even though it's like poison, they will never silence me, 'cause I have no fear, as long as the truth is here. Even though it's like poison, they will never silence me, 'cause I have no fear, as long as the truth is here. When dreams crumble into dust and nameless ones do what they must, even if it means dying to live, yeah. One voice raised in protest, ooh, can only lay to rest greed and lies and deception. Find your strength within. If I don't have to all give in, long as God is with you, no one can stand against you. Even though it's like poison, they will never silence me.
With the lights. Thank you so much for your applause, but the applause really goes to Marsha. And every time I see this piece, and I get choked up again, you know, just to know that some of those people who are in that film are not here. And it wasn't necessary for them not to be here. It's because people were greedy and people were selfish. And I'm glad that Marsha was in their lives. I think it's very important that each of you in here make it your business to not only purchase a book, purchase two. If you're an educator, okay, and you work in your churches, you need to make this information available to your congregation, to your students, and have a discussion. I have a daughter, she's 17 years old. She read that book in a weekend. And she has so many questions, and so you know, you can talk to high schoolers, folks who are in college. They will be able to get the information that is in that book. That is a perfect Christmas gift, you know, for this holiday, a Christmas Kwanzaa, whatever. Have a book or two, one on the table, and one that Marsha will autograph, hopefully for you this evening. We have to support these good works. Freedom is not free. And to make people aware of some of the things that are going on, part of their reality, and giving them the tools that if she can do it, Marsha Coleman's probably 125 pounds soaking wet. You can stand up where you are at your job, right where you are, and something is going on, something's not correct, to stand up in the face of adversity. So I'm sure she's heard this before, but she really is, to me, the Rosa Parks of our generation. She spearheaded the only civil rights law to be passed since the 1960s. And by the way, there was not one dissenting vote in this legislation. And she was the only person who had this done with a coalition. So it wasn't just, her struggle. She was able to find common ground with so many other organizations and bring those people together. This is a testimony to the fact that any legislator faced with Marsha's integrity and commitment would be in awe of her sacrifice and courage and immediately side with her. She is a shining example for all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, it is truly my privilege to introduce to you Dr. Marsha Coleman-Adebayo.
Good evening. Good evening. So many thanks to so many people. I'm so incredibly honored to be here tonight and to have this opportunity to engage you in a dialogue and a conversation about our country and where it's going. First, thanks. Let me thank Deborah Hirsch, Mid-Manhattan Library. Thank you so much for all the telephone calls and emails preparing us for this evening. Thank you for Lois Moore, who gave this absolutely beautiful introduction. Thank you so much. Tylan Washington, what can I say? You've seen his work. Can we please give him another round of applause? We depend on independent filmmakers to tell us the other side of the story. And Tylan could work in Hollywood or some fancy production company, but here he is in the community providing information for all of us so that we understand our world a bit better. I'd like to also thank Danny Glover and Absentia, because he was the one who provided the film crew so that we could introduce you to the vanadium victims. Danny provided the resources for the crew, for the production team, and so I am eternally grateful to Danny for that. And he's also optioned the book for a feature film. So thanks to Danny in cyberspace out there, and also thanks to my husband who couldn't make it tonight. I have colleagues here from Barnard and from MIT, and just so grateful that all of you decided to spend your evening with us. I'm going to start with an introduction, with a reading from the book. This is actually the first paragraph of the book. They came to me, complaining of green tongues. They told me about bleeding from every orifice. Their husbands could no longer perform. The sheet on his side of the bed would be black in the morning from whatever it was that oozed from his pores while he tried to sleep. Some had only photographs of their husbands who had died at the age of 50 but had looked like 95. There were reports of many dead and more dying. The company would not help. The company would not even let them see their own x-rays. It was an American company. So they had come to me. For them, I was America. I worked for the United States Environmental Protection Agency, and America had sent me to them in joy and celebration at the end of apartheid. America had come to help them, and to help their new government succeed. In government, we spend so much time spinning the truth. There are times when, as citizens, however, we need to set pretense aside. We need to cut to the chase and spit out the truth. And that is what I'm going to do tonight. But we're going to start with my favorite story about a whistleblower. Date, December 1st, 1955. Place, Montgomery, Alabama. The bus driver said to a group of black folks on a bus, "Y'all better make it light on yourselves and let me have those seats." When the bus driver realized that there was still one person sitting while the others had gone to the back of the bus, he came over to this young woman and he said, "Did you hear me? I said you better make it to the back of the bus." And when he didn't receive a reply, he said, "Are you going to leave your seat?" And this young lady said, "No." Now, under normal circumstances, this is clearly intimidating to have a bus driver tell you what to do and to tell you to move. But when you realize that this happened in 1955 in Montgomery, Alabama, where there was a very thin line between the Ku Klux Klan and the bus driver, in other words, he probably owed his job to the local Klan organization, that the Klan controlled the sheriff's office and all the other municipal offices, so that when this bus driver asked this young lady to leave, he was really speaking with authority that was not bequeathed to him because he was a bus driver. He was speaking with something much more powerful. It's the power of violence. So he asked her again, "Are you going to leave your seat?" And this young lady said, "No." Then the bus driver told her that if you don't leave your seat, I'm going to have you arrested. And what did she say? She said, "You may do that. You may do that." You see, at some point, we've all experienced someone in authority telling us to do something that we know is wrong. But how many of us have the courage of that young woman to say, "You may do that"? For example, I hear this all the time. My boss said that I must not report the discrepancy that I found in our financial situation, and if I do, he'll fire me. Or what if your boss is the President of the United States, and he tells you to stand down on clean air regulations? But you know that if you stand down on clean air regulations, that thousands of people will die. But your job is on the line. How many heads of agencies would have the courage of that young woman to say no? And if the president was threatening your position, if he was going to ask you for your resignation, would you have the courage to say, "You may do that"? You see, everyone has a Rosa Parks moment. My Rosa Parks moment came at the Environmental Protection Agency. I joined the EPA in 1990 as a senior foreign policy analyst after working at the United Nations, the World Wildlife Fund, and various stints as professors. In all of my previous positions, I had never worked anywhere as stifling, racist, sexist, and anti-democratic as the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. In fact, the environment within the EPA reminded me of a 21st century plantation. The system was held together by an intricate web of fear of retaliation, fear of losing your health insurance, fear of saying the wrong thing. But the mother of all fear, what really kept this system together, was the fear of losing your job. So fear is the ever-present guest in the federal government. If you don't believe me, ask Bradley Manning. Ask Daniel Ellsberg, Matthew Fogg, Tanya Ward Jordan, all whistleblowers, all targeted by the government for retaliation for speaking out against corruption. And it's the fear that prevents federal employees from exposing corruption, exposing health dangers to the public. It's this kind of fear that prevents good people from sounding the alarm when they find out that there's lead in the water or mercury in the food, or that a basketball coach is molesting 10-year-old boys. Fear. So I became the EPA representative to the Gore and Becky Commission in 1996. The commission was designated as a flagship foreign policy vehicle between the U.S. and the newly elected government of Nelson Mandela. Under international agreement, my job was to work with the South African Department of Environment and Tourism to provide humanitarian assistance to the people of South Africa who have been so devastated by decades of racist rule. But not long after I assumed this position, I was approached by a South African environmental leader named Jacob Ungukani. You saw a picture of him in the clip. And he told me about a community about 2 hours from the capital of Pretoria called Brits, where miners were reportedly being injured and dying from exposure to vanadium pentoxide, a metal that's used to strengthen steel. He described workers who bled from every orifice, workers who defecated and urinated blood, their tongues turned green, sometimes brown, sometimes black. And when I reported the situation to my supervisor, a situation that anyone would consider horrific, but particularly if you work for the EPA, she told me to shut up. And she went on to explain that since I had just moved into a brand new office, that what I need to do is to really spend my time decorating. Well, I was shocked. I mean, I had just told an EPA official that on my duty station, people were reportedly dying from a substance, and that a U.S. company was responsible, and I was told to shut up. In fact, what I was really told was that I needed to have a Martha Stewart moment. I would learn, however, that whenever there is a decision to be made between a company, a multinational company, and the health of people, almost always the decision is made in favor of the corporation. So a little bit about who I am, my background. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. The Civil Rights Movement and the Motown Revolution was the backdrop to my childhood. On special Sundays, when I was really good, my mom would take me to Reverend Franklin's church to hear Aretha sing in her daddy's choir. News of Medgar Evers and Emmett Till's murder shook my community. My grandfather, the Reverend George Lee Thompson, worked with other Baptist ministers to welcome Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. for the first recitation of the I Have a Dream speech in Coble Hall. My grandmother was a member of the Marcus Garvey movement, the Back to Africa movement, and she fought the Ku Klux Klan in her small southern town. My granny kept a shotgun right by her front door. It was a double barrel shotgun. And I used to ask my granny when I would visit her in the summer, "Granny, why do you have a shotgun right by your front door?" And my granny would look at me and put her hands on her hip, and she'd say, "Marsha, if any of those pointy-head people try to come through my door, this will be the last door they'll ever come through in Portsmouth, Ohio." That was my grandmother. My mother fought the Detroit school system when it tried to track me into special education. Now, I remember coming home with a card that said I was special and telling my mom, "Mom, the school said that I'm special. I'm in a special education program." And my mother, being very patient and very loving,
said, "You are special, but not in the way they mean you're special." And so the next day I was getting ready to go to school, and instead of going to school, there my mom was waiting for me at the door, and she said, "We're going to school together." And so we walked in together, and I'm like this because I'm the only one walking in with my mom. And I was about to go to my classes, and she took my hand and she said, "No, you're coming with me." And she took me to the principal's office. And she said, "Marsha, sit down." And I thought, my God, what did I do this time? And my mom made it known that she had to see the principal now. And the secretary started scurrying about. Finally, he came out of the door, and my mom went into his office. My mother was a very soft-spoken person, but this time I heard loud noise. I'd never heard my mother scream and screech like this. And then things started falling off the wall. And I looked at the secretaries, and they were looking at each other like, should we call the police? And I'm thinking, oh my God, they're going to take my mommy. But then the principal came out and said, you know, my mom had made him understand that he had erred in placing me in special education. In fact, the principal said my mom had convinced him that I belonged in college prep. Then my mother cleared her throat. He says, no, I'm sorry, you're right. She belongs in our honors program. That was the power of my mother. So in 1 hour, I was transferred from special education to the honors program. And she told me that night that she was actually prepared to go to jail that day. But she was not prepared for the Detroit school system to kill her dream. So I grew up around strong women, activist women, women who had a very strong moral compass. So when the EPA asked me to look the other way and not do everything in my power to help the victims of vanadium poisoning, I said no. I said no. It was simply not a part of my DNA. And when the EPA closed its doors on the victims of vanadium poisoning, I reached out to civil society, to the people. I contacted my girlfriends who were medical doctors and said, would you mind going to South Africa with me, because we still have to investigate. If the United States government isn't going to do it, then we'll do it ourselves. And after that first visit to South Africa, then I reached out to my college, Barnard College. I went to Barnard and I begged them. I said, we need professors, we need students, we have to go to South Africa, we have to investigate vanadium. And what did my college say? They said yes. How many professors, how many students? So we took 2 professors, 4 students to South Africa, and we investigated. We continued to investigate vanadium poisoning. So as you know, the EPA environment for me was a very difficult place. As you saw in the clip, I was called uppity, you can fill in the gap. I was called an honorary white man. I was called aggressive. I was called BIT, well, you know. I was called everything you can imagine. And that was in the workplace. That wasn't even on their time. That was actually in the workplace. And I constantly had to worry about this very fine line of angering managers and then suffering the brutality of their anger. And let me give you an example of what really a day for me was like in that environment. You said they're listening. I was called into the office of the Assistant Secretary of the Office of International Activity. His name was Dr. Alan Hecht. And I didn't know why I was being called in. All I know is my secretary came and said, you've got to get upstairs. The boss wants to see you. So I run upstairs to see what it is he wanted to talk to me about. Marsha, Hecht said furiously, Why don't you just go down to the Office of Civil Rights and file a complaint? I wasn't sure if I was interrupting the rantings of a lunatic or if I was an invisible visitor in a conversation that Heck was having with himself. Heck was yelling at the top of his lungs and banging his fist on the table he sat behind. Alan, what are you talking about? I repeatedly asked. I felt ambushed, paralyzed, trapped. I couldn't get enough air in my nostrils, and I felt like I had taken a punch to my solar plexus. He was so absorbed in his own conversation that I don't think he heard me ask, what was he talking about? I cautiously sat down, looking around the room for a window or any alternate route of escape, hoping that one of the secretaries would open the door to investigate the shouting and banging in Heck's office. We didn't have these kinds of problems until you people came here, he said. What are you talking about? I have no idea. I tried to interject, but his yelling intensified, his face getting closer and closer to mine. I could feel the heat radiating from his skin, and I could smell and feel particles of recently ingested tuna. His eyes were bulging and his face had turned a bright red. He had worked himself into a state of self-induced frenzy. Pounding the table, he yelled again, just file a complaint. I'm sick of this. Stop shouting at me, I demanded with equal force, using every nerve in my body to steady my voice. I stared him down. Get out of my face, I said slowly but firmly. He moved back, and I could finally breathe for the first time since entering his office. Marsha, one of your colleagues told me that you made an inappropriate comment at the last Africa team meeting. This kind of behavior will not be tolerated. Do you understand? His voice had started to rise again. Alan, you've got the wrong black person. Franklin attended that meeting, not me. I quickly picked up my notepad and headed for the door. The next time you decide to call someone in and yell at them, I suggest you get the right person, because we don't all look alike. If you want to understand the culture of the EPA or the culture of the federal government, follow the money. Follow the money. After Dr. Heck's performance in federal court, in which my lawyer confronted him and he admitted to what you just heard, his punishment was a detail to the White House. And now Dr. Heck, under the Lisa Jackson administration, is director of the EPA Office of Sustainable Development. The reality is that managers that discriminate and retaliate are rewarded, not punished. Or, for example, take the example of former EPA Administrator Carol Browner, who you saw in this clip, whose career at EPA ended in total disgrace after my trial, because she was attempting to defend discriminating and retaliating managers who had failed in my case. Congress condemned her, passed a law because of the activities in the agency, roundly condemned her. But one of the first acts of President Obama was to recycle Carol Browner back into the political process and to recast her, resuscitate her in the role as the new energy czar. So if you want to understand why the culture of the federal government is so dysfunctional and so in many ways psychotic, follow what it does and not what it says. So I sued the EPA. I sued the agency. And on August 18, 2000, a jury declared that the EPA was guilty of racism, sexism, color discrimination, as well as a hostile work environment. But what was happening to me was happening throughout the federal government. Different people, different situations, but a remarkable pattern of similarity. And it was that unbearable situation that provided the fertile ground for the coalescing of the No Fear Coalition. And after my trial and congressional testimony, Congressman F. James Sensenbrenner and Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee introduced the No Fear Act. This group, called the No Fear Coalition, consisted of the most courageous individuals in the federal government. For 2 long years, we marched, we faxed, we wore out shoes on Capitol Hill. We talked to anyone who would stand still for 2 minutes to listen to what was going on in the federal government. Actually, the first vote for this bill was actually scheduled for September 11th, 2001. So we were on the steps of the Capitol when the security officer screamed from the top of the stairs, "Run for your lives." And after that, of course, we saw the smoke billowing from the Pentagon. After 9/11, we regrouped and continued to fight. Votes were rescheduled on both the House and the Senate side, and we prevailed. And we prevailed and we triumphed. We passed the first civil rights and whistleblower law of the 21st century through a unanimous vote from both chambers of Congress. What we accomplished in the No Fear Coalition is an example of what people can do when they determine how powerful they are. We knew that left to Congress or the president, we would continue to hold the position of collateral damage. Left up to people in power, the conditions we met in the federal government would never change. We decided to take back our power, to organize our colleagues and anyone else who would work with us until we had overwhelming presence. The struggle was difficult. We lost people. People lost their jobs. They lost their homes. We had a couple of casualties where people died in the struggle, but we kept marching. We kept fighting, and we prevailed. So now we've introduced No Fear 2, and we're going to introduce No Fear 3 legislation. But legislation cannot take the place of people standing up and blowing the whistle. And that's why I support the Occupy movement. I've led 2 demonstrations to EPA called Occupy EPA, and we're calling upon the EPA administrator and the president to reverse their decision on the clean air regulations. But we need more whistleblowers. As a society, we needed someone to blow the whistle at Penn State. We need more whistleblowers. So everyone has a Rosa Parks moment. When the words of Gandhi becomes your rally cry, do not bend your knees before an oppressor. I have not stopped. I will not stop. And I cannot stop until we have fundamentally changed government from a government of corruption and backroom deals with corporations to one that's for and by the people. And I'd like to end with my third and last reading. It's perhaps, I think, the most emotional prose poem of all of them in the book. It's really my favorite, but I think it sums up what this evening has been about. And it's a poem that I wrote called Something Deeper Than Words. Something deeper than words. Something happens when a person stands up one day and says, I refuse. Often it is a first. I refuse to give up my seat. I refuse to settle for less. I refuse to look the other way. It is beyond the day-to-day, the trendy, or the job description. But something deeper than words, beyond bullets and older than anything we have ever known, returns to us in that moment, large and independent, but still needing us. Something comes to life in our refusal and becomes a singular creed we must obey. Thank you. Okay, sorry.
Could you explain about Al Gore's relationship with you working? It says working, assisting post-apartheid South Africa. In that situation, could you explain details?
Sure. I was the executive secretary for the Environment Committee for the Gore and Mbeki Commission. And of course, Al Gore and the other vice president for South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, came together as the two vice presidents to head up these committees. The commission was broken out by department. So you had Department of Agriculture, the EPA, Department of Defense. So I worked in the environment section of that. He was certainly aware. One day, a number of people started writing letters to Vice President Gore about this situation. And one day I came into my office and there was a package on my desk with the seal of the President of the United States. It took my breath away because it meant that, first of all, the White House was now involved, and it meant that that the Vice President knew about what was going on. And it also probably meant that they understood that I was working with NGOs and doing my job to make sure that the public was aware of what was going on. And the letter, the package basically said, before we respond to a letter from Randall Robinson, who was, at that point was the president of Trans-Africa, that the White House wanted to see our draft. So it was quite clear that damage control was in place. And they wanted to make sure that we didn't say anything at the EPA that the White House didn't know about.
Wow. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, he has a microphone.
When I was in undergrad, the big thing at that point was strip mining. And we became very much aware of what was going on. And naturally, I was against it. And eventually, people started to talk more about it, and it became against the law to strip mine. So I'm wondering whether, well, you did mention that the colleges were dealing with it, but I mean on a larger plane, you know, where you write theses and so forth and so on. The other question I have is, okay, vanadium is something that they use with batteries. What does it do? I'd like to know exactly.
Yeah.
And also,
okay.
Did they get sick because the dump was left open, or did they get sick because they were working closely with the vanadium?
Vanadium. Yeah, vanadium pentoxide. Vanadium pentoxide is a metal that's found buried deep in the Earth's crust. And it's used to strengthen steel. So if you look around the room and you see things are made of steel, then there's a very good chance that vanadium is inside of that steel. Vanadium is crucial in many ways. Henry Ford actually found out how crucial it is because the Model Ts kept cracking. Because in Detroit, when he was building the Model T, Detroit has extreme weather. It's very hot and very cold. And in the winter, the Model T started having problems because of the steel cracking. Right. But when Henry Ford found out about vanadium and started mixing vanadium and with steel, of course, then the vehicles could go quite easily from summer to winter because the vanadium allowed the steel to expand and contract.
When it comes out, is it dust or
it comes out? It comes out as a white grayish metal, but there's a lot of dust, contaminated dust around it. And it's also in a field with a lot of other very toxic elements. And so the miners are basically in these large pits, and they're digging out the vanadium with very flimsy gloves, almost no mask. They use a mask that I wouldn't even use to clean my house. It's so flimsy. And they give them masks like once every 6 months. And so they're usually using their hands to cover their noses. And so the dust basically covers everything in this area. So of course the dust goes up and it comes down as acid rain. So the area around the vanadium airfield is obviously it's dead, essentially. There's no trees or grass or whatever. So it's very, very, very toxic. What we understood that vanadium might be toxic when I went to South Africa the first time. What we had never found in the literature was the impact of vanadium on women. And when we went to visit some of the homes of vanadium workers, and we saw that the wives were coughing and they were complaining of the same symptoms as their husbands, we started asking questions about that. And we found out that the mine never provided instructions for the husbands in terms of how to clean up before they came home. So the husbands were coming in with vanadium under their fingernails, in their hair. And in South Africa, where you have children sleeping in the same bed with their parents, children were also being impacted.
Hi, I heard you on Leonard Lopate today, and it was very interesting. I went to his website afterwards, and the comments, I felt like there was a bunch of Fox people who, like, I mean, do you find that people are not really ready to hear, the kind of bigotry that exists in, corporate America and in our society in general? And also, do you think, as a whistleblower, even though there's tons of people who speak out, that people still want to hold on to the idea that America is like the land of honesty and freedom?
I'm really grateful that I didn't see the comments, first of all. But I think the comments were probably in reaction to a question he asked me. He asked me whether I thought the EPA should be closed down. And what I said was no, I thought that we needed a real EPA, an EPA that was a really strong advocate for the people as opposed to for corporations. And then instead of fewer regulations, I wanted more regulations. So I think probably that maybe that sort of got the Fox News folks engaged a bit. But that really is my position, is that I'd like to see an EPA that does not use a cost-benefit analysis. How much is it going to cost business versus how many people are we going to lose if businesses don't make enough money? I'd like to see an EPA whose sole focus is the health and welfare of people. And, I've sat in so many meetings where we've had to decide, will this constituency, meaning one of the chemical company, whatever, will not be happy if we do this. On the other hand, we might injure people. And for me, there's no equation at all. I want to know, how do we make sure that everyone is healthy? How do we make sure we have clean water, clean air in this country?
Well, I'm sorry. I just because I just wanted a follow up on that. That just because when you had ended, you had said that after you were taken out, then the private sector people came in, and I don't know if you're aware of John Perkins' Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Mm-hmm. Can you speak to that a little bit? I'm sorry, I didn't want to monopolize, but it was just really important that people understand what came next.
Well, I think the best example of what you're talking about is the clean air regulations that I referenced in my report. As you know, a couple of weeks ago, the EPA had asked President Obama to sign the new smog regulations, and according to the reports by the administrator's office, these regulations would have potentially saved the lives of over 7,000 people. Would have prevented 11,000 emergency room visits and 38,000 asthma attacks. I mean, those are fairly large numbers. But what happened is that the president was being lobbied by big business and also the right wing of the Republican Party. And so he asked the EPA administrator to step down on pushing these clean air regulations. So we have some decisions to make in this country about whether or not businesses are going to drive public health policy or whether science will drive public health policy.
One of the other lectures that I attended here, we learned that molybdenum and tungsten were both used to strengthen steel. When did vanadium become that important, or was it a way of outsourcing the labor to other countries so that it was cheaper, or how did that come about?
Well, tungsten is obviously, it's a substitute for vanadium. but it's more expensive than vanadium, and that's the problem in South Africa, is that you have cheap labor plus you have a cheap labor and you have a cheap mineral. And so those two somehow go together, and that's unfortunate because we do have substitutes for vanadium, but as long as tungsten is more expensive and you have cheap labor, at this point we've not seen any movement towards tungsten.
Yes, so far, how many people died because of vanadium poisoning in South Africa? That's my number one question. And the second one is the situation, this vanadium poisoning in South Africa. Is it getting better, or what is the situation right now in South Africa?
The health department in South Africa did not keep those kinds of statistics under apartheid. So we have no idea what happened before the onset of the Nelson Mandela government. And even now, the statistics are fairly faint. They need a lot of work. And there's a lot of mixture going on in terms of different environmental problems. I mean, some people are smoking, some people are exposed to vanadium. So how do you begin to ferret out the different kinds of exposures that people are experiencing? And that was the reason why we had the U.S. government, along with the South African government, had decided to organize an independent research investigation. And that really would have been the first time that an independent investigation of vanadium poisoning would have happened. And I believe, and I cannot prove this, but I believe what happened is that when they saw how serious we were in terms of promoting the investigation, probably a little phone call came through from people in the industry and told us to shut down the investigation. I mean, those are the phone calls that you never really can prove, but you, after working in the government, you know they happen. So, but for whatever reason, I was told to pull the plug on the investigation. Now, I started yelling and screaming about this, as you can imagine, because I'm receiving phone calls every day from South Africa saying people are ill and dying. And so I finally got the agency to agree to at least send a medical doctor to South Africa, at least to give us some initial data in terms of what was going on. I was processing that request, and I called him to ask him what his specialty was. And you won't believe this, or maybe you will after my discussion. He turned out to be a veterinarian.
Yes, I couldn't help but wonder. I can't help but wonder that so many people probably knew it before you started. So I'm wondering, what is the incentive that someone has to have to be involved to the extent that you did? And also, what's the first thing that a potential whistleblower should do to protect him or herself before he gets involved? Or should he do that at all? Thank you.
Well, one incentive cannot be that you want to make a lot of money. I would. You have to laugh about these things. I think there's a moral compass. I'm not really sure if there are incentives. I mean, certainly we have a law now that will, in the private sector, that will allow you to recover a portion of the funds that are recovered by the government or the agency. And so if it's a huge settlement, then the whistleblower can recover, I think, up to 10%. But if you're a federal government worker, that would not, that particular law does not address federal government workers. So I think it really is an issue of moral compass at this point for federal government workers. And what we need are laws that will protect us, because quite frankly, everyone in this room is vulnerable. As long as we don't have laws to protect federal government whistleblowers, your water, your air, your food, it's all translated through government agencies. And if you have people in those agencies that are too afraid, too fearful to speak out for the public, then we are all at risk. And so, it has to be almost a national goods kind of thing where the public comes together and say, we have to protect whistleblowers because they are the first line of defense for democracy and the first line of defense for our safety, our personal safety in this country. In terms of your second question, if I remember it correctly, in terms of the whistleblower issue, no, I'm sorry, can you repeat your second question?
If you're going to become a whistleblower, what do you do initially to protect yourself, or should you think about that? Just go ahead and follow your moral conscience, and, you know it might be retaliation. So what would you do? Do you seek a lawyer, or do you talk with your family, or a priest, or pray, or whatever?
All of the above is very helpful. The reality is that most people don't set out to become a whistleblower. You're working on a project and you find a discrepancy. Well, you don't realize that you're going to end up being a whistleblower. You just ask your supervisor, well, there's a discrepancy here. And how do you think this discrepancy found its way into this report? Or you're reading or writing something like the report on, for example, I was thinking of the ambassador who had said that there was no, uranium in Niger. And all of a sudden it's in a presidential address, and then you say, no, I didn't tell you that. So most people do not set out to become whistleblowers. You trip on an issue, and before you know it, the people around you understand what you found, and all of a sudden you begin to become the target. A lot of whistleblowers don't even know they've blown the whistle. They don't even know they've blown the whistle. All they know is they said, something's not right here. And then the person who you said that to was thinking, oh my God, if she continues to dig, she's going to find something. And so in order to stop you from continuing to dig, they start to retaliate against you. And before you know it, you are at that point a whistleblower because you've probably figured out that there's something wrong. And so it's hard to tell people what to do in advance, since most people, when I went to my supervisor and said, there's a community in South Africa that seems to be suffering from this, I'm receiving reports, I had no idea what was going to happen to me. I had no idea. That was 18 years. I had no idea that the agency was going to react that way. In fact, I thought my supervisor was going to say, oh my God, let's get on this. We can't allow this to happen. Why don't you give me a contact at this corporation? Let's see if we can't talk and make sense of this whole thing. But in fact, what happened was my performance evaluation started going down. The whole playbook went into effect, where your performance evaluations start going down. You start getting notes in your personnel file that you're not doing well, even though you have been doing very well up until that time. I had just received, I think, a bronze medal for performance, and 2 weeks later I received a notice that my performance was failing. So it doesn't make any sense. That's the reason why I won, because some of these guys maybe are not the brightest cookies in the jar, but they just continue to just harass you, and they're putting everything in writing. So if there are any potential whistleblowers out there, if you think that you've tripped upon something that's not right, what I would say is start taking notes. You have to start taking notes. I would join a whistleblower group, the National Whistleblower Center, Government Accountability. There's so many wonderful whistleblower groups, No Fear Coalition. But start talking to people. Start making sure that you keep your notes safe, someplace that's safe, wherever in your house. Make sure at some point you do have to consult an attorney if it becomes a legal matter. But as I said, most whistleblowers they don't intend to blow. Whistleblowers are made, they're not born.
What happened to your family? He mentioned about your daughter was ready to kidnap.
Yeah. The film that we saw is always very difficult for me to watch, because that film took place in a courtyard in back of a church. And my daughter was with me on one of my missions, and she was playing with the minors, and I was interviewing minors. As you could probably hear my voice going, in the background. That's me. And all of a sudden, someone started yelling, "Sade, Sade," and I turned around, and the miners had literally encircled my child. And there she was, about 8, 9 years old, in the center of these vanadium mine workers. And when I ran over to see what was going on, they said that she was walking away with someone they knew who was an agent of the vanadium mine. And when I asked her, she said, oh, he just told me he wanted me to see something. He wanted to take me to the front of And so they saved my daughter. They literally surrounded her, and they took care of her. And so I'm just eternally grateful for that. But but let me just say, it's a very difficult time for women because not only are you double tasking in terms of going to work and also your duties at home, but now as a whistleblower, you're also having to take on these responsibilities as well. But my kids have really benefited in many ways from my struggle. And I think they would both tell you that even though it was very difficult, they understand something about justice now that a lot of their friends don't understand.
My question is, did the American government compensate the victims or planning to compensate them? My second question is, do you have something untold in your book, something you wanted to tell now that is not written in your book?
We have to save that for the documentary film.
Thank you.
No, unfortunately. When I was pulled off of the vanadium project, they replaced me with a colleague whose focus was the private sector. The reality is that I was a Trojan horse, guys. I mean, that's the reality of it. The Nelson Mandela government had come to power. They thought that the government would be more receptive with someone who looked like me at the table than other people. And what they wanted me to do was to basically open the doors to American businesses. And when I realized that that's what was going on, that's when I started really yelling and screaming, no, I will not be used like this. The government has not acknowledged that there's a problem. So the issue of compensation is totally out of the question. Or the American company. Now, in fact, if you go to their website, it's all about how great they are, and they're building schools and they're building clinics. And no, the company has never admitted wrongdoing.
I was wondering, uranium has, what's the, oh, wow.
Vanadium?
Vanadium.
No. I wanted to ask you if vanadium has uranium in it.
No, it doesn't.
No. There's nothing that's like nuclear energy and anything like that?
It's not nuclear, no.
Oh, okay. Well, I was wondering, because nuclear energy, they use salt and water to break down the molecules of the radiation. So I was wondering whether you should concentrate on that area, because the fact of the matter is that it does bring income, whether it's, we know that it's not safe and, not healthy for the people, but I was wondering if there was some way that we could find something that they could use, like, for instance, if salt and water could break down the molecular structure of the chemical, then they would be able to work, with the product and not get sick. So I was wondering whether there was anyone working on that level.
Not that I know of. Vanadium mining is very different than gold mining and diamond mining. Vanadium mining is open pit mining. And so basically what you're doing is you're basically mining areas about 3 or 4 football fields long, wide. So all of that dust is just going up into the atmosphere. So it's not contained. It's not contained dust, in other words. It's dispersed. And so, what I would say about the income generation issue is that mining tends to be an intergenerational activity. You find grandfathers and fathers and sons mining in the same location, whether that's coal mining in West Virginia or whether that's vanadium mining in South Africa. It's intergenerational work. And so the question is, how do we begin to develop a sustainable future for these communities where we don't have to disturb the earth in that way, and where we can retrain these workers, these people, to productive work as opposed to work that will harm them?
I guess I have the mic here.
we're talking here about the U.S. EPA, which I have a lot of very negative associations with, but we've essentially neglected the role, if any, of the South African government, who are fully cognizant of this, who want their raw materials, their minerals, to be exploited to the advantage, hopefully, of their people. All of the stuff around us happens to be, virtually everything in this room is the result of extractive metallurgy and mining. Vanadium, any ideas to the contrary, is a pretty basic steel additive. There aren't any substitutes for it that are economically viable. But at any rate, the big issue is that what has been done to get the South African government to get off their butts and to address this issue. It's not really our problem, it's the South Africans' problem. In this particular case, we made it our problem, but what has been done, if anything, to get the South Africans to step up to the plate?
Well, that's a $24 million question, isn't it? And I'm certainly not going to provide excuses for that. But what I will say is that one of the legacies of apartheid is this vast reserve, this vast commitment, or this vast dependency on the mining sector. South Africa is a country, as you know, that's very rich in minerals and environmental materials, and the world has all flocked to South Africa for these materials, whether it's gold or diamond. Our economy is just as dependent on South Africa as South Africa is dependent upon us. That's the reality. This is a global economy, and these two economies are locked together. And 80% of South Africa's GNP is dependent upon the mining industry. So that would mean that the whole economy would come to a grinding halt, not only for vanadium, but what about gold mining? What about asbestos? What about rubber mining? I mean, if they stop mining, then the whole economy would come to a screeching halt. So it is a challenge for future South African policymakers. How do they begin to restructure their economy where they're not so dependent on an activity that's so detrimental to their people?
There's nothing intrinsically problematic about mining. It's the name of our industrialized and even Iron Age societies. It can be, and economically can be made safe. That we're talking here about pretty rudimentary industrial hygiene, a relatively small investment, and I think that it's not, rocket science to protect these workers, and it's abdicating collective responsibility to suggest that it is. You can mine a lot of really toxic stuff if you take the proper precautions, and they're obviously not being taken for a very small amount of additional investment.
You're not going to get an argument with me on that. That's obviously the case. I would just argue, though, with open pit mining, it's a little bit different than cave mining, because even if you could protect the workers, in other words, if they could work in a bubble suit, right, which is, as you know, if you've worked in an environment, it's very hot, very sticky, really difficult work when you're working in these suits. Even if you could do that, what happens to all the dust that's going up into the atmosphere and coming back down as acid rain? So how do you protect the environment? So I agree with you that we could protect the workers better, but most likely not the natural environment. And that's even the water tables and animals and other kinds of important environmental creatures. So it's a difficult problem. But it's a problem that I think the South Africans are going to have to work out. From my position, we are solidarity workers with them. When I first went to South Africa, I was basically gung-ho, like, close the mine down, let's, sue the company. And the miners were basically, look, this is the work that we do. If we close the mine down, we will die from hunger. That's our choice. And so that meant that we have to respect the workers who are involved in this process, and then provide the resources that they need to help them make intelligent decisions, but not go to the site and then try to impose our
our thoughts or our wishes upon them. So, but you're right, it's an intractable problem, and the injury rate is very high, as you can imagine.
Hi, Marsha.
Hi.
I wanted to ask, because obviously, people like you are in the trenches, you're doing your job, and, then you go through struggles like this. What has been the impact of the No Fear legislation that you can point to? I mean, I don't know if you've been able to see any changes in the EPA, but maybe just in general, what's the impact been?
Well, the impact has been substantial. I mean, that's one of the great things about struggle, is that you actually do at times see the fruit of your hands. With the EPA, with the No Fear Act, for example, federal employees must take No Fear training every 2 years. So if you're in the federal government, you are being trained in this law every 2 years. So that means that you have a pretty good idea what your rights are now and should be able to defend yourself if you are being attacked by some illegally in the workplace. Second of all, if you join the federal government, within 90 days of joining the federal government, you must be trained in the No Fear Act. So as soon as you go into the federal government, they give you a book, or you take training in the No Fear Act. Another benefit of the No Fear Act is that when I sued the federal government, there was a slush fund that had been created in the Department of Treasury, so that when people won lawsuits like mine, instead of the agency being responsible and taking account for what had happened, they would just simply send the bill to the slush fund in the Department of Treasury. That's pretty nice, right? You get a bill for whatever, and instead of you paying it, you just send it to a little slush fund. Well, that's what the federal government was doing. Now, under No Fear, when an agency is found liable for discrimination, that agency pays for the bill. They don't send it off to a little slush fund anymore. Also, every 6 months, Congress receives a report from the GAO, basically outlining a snapshot of what the federal government looks like on the inside in terms of retaliation, discrimination, so no one can say ever again that they don't know what's going on in the federal government. Also, if you go to any federal government website, whether it's the White House, the CIA, FBI, it doesn't matter. On the front screen of the website will be a No Fear icon. You click on the No Fear icon, and all of their EEO and whistleblower protection issues will appear on your screen. So now we have more data than we have ever had before to protect ourselves and to use if we have to go to court. One of the problems that I had as I was preparing to go to court was that I didn't know whether I was the only person at the EPA or whether there were 100 other people. No one has to ever wonder about that again in the federal government. So we've made incredible strides through the first No Fear Act, but we're not finished. There's No Fear 2, and we've also drafted No Fear 3. And someone asked me the other day, well, how many No Fears will there be? And I said, well, we'll just keep producing No Fear legislation until we get it right. Until we're able to break the back of corruption in the federal government, we will keep passing No Fear legislation.
I have a couple of questions. The first one is, do you think that your supervisors at the EPA were aware of the details of the toxic effects on the workers in South Africa at the time that you reported it? Because it seemed their reaction was immediate. Maybe it was knee-jerk, but maybe they already knew about it. And my other question is, what is the mechanism whereby the EPA could control what a company is doing in another country?
Actually, I think I was the only one who didn't know the toxicity of vanadium, to be very honest with you. The assistant administrator for my office was very heavily involved in the extractive industry. And maybe this is a good time to talk about the revolving door between industry and government. Because, political appointees usually come in from the private sector, they enter the government, they make fantastic contacts while they're government employees, and then they take those contacts back into the private sector. The problem is that while they're still in the government, they're really sort of performing the duties in terms of contacts and laying their nest egg for when they leave the government. So my office was no different. So my assistant administrator had been head of a Mobil oil company in Tokyo, Zaire, and Nigeria. So did he understand something about the extractive industry? Oh yeah, he understood. My supervisor that told me to decorate my office, she was formerly she formerly had worked at USAID. But what we found out during the trial, when they sort of backtracked her career, is that she was also a CIA agent. So did she understand something about the extractive industry? Most likely she did. She certainly understood something about America's strategic interests. And so when I raised the issue of vanadium poisoning, I actually think she was probably trying to say, you don't want to go there. I mean, I think that's really what she was trying to say is, you don't want to go there, because if you go there, we're going to have to take you out. And essentially, that's eventually what happened, is that when I refused to stop asking questions, they removed me. They called me into the office one day and said that we are removing you as executive secretary of the Gore and Becky because you don't know whose side you're on. You don't know whose side you're on. You're not a team player. You're too close to those blacks in South Africa. You're certainly too close to black folks in this country. So you have no idea whose side you're on. And so we, turn over all of your materials to this guy named Mark Caseman, who was in charge of the private sector issues, because he will take it from here.
And the mechanism whereby the EPA could intercede in another country?
International agreement. I mean, we had an agreement called the Gore and Becky Commission, and there were international agreements that came out of the commission, signed by both the United States and South Africa. But more importantly, a lot of our work is not just simply a part of an international agreement. It's also a lot of behind-the-scenes work. I could have very easily called the corporation and said, look, I'd like to have an off-the-record conversation with you. We're working on this project, and before this becomes a major legal battle, could we somehow come together and talk about things? A lot of my work consisted of those kinds of informal approaches as well. So it doesn't always, our work doesn't always have to rise to a major international agreement. There's a lot of work behind the scenes as well. Thank you very much.
For more information, visit the author's website, Marsha Coleman-Adebayo.com.